Roger Taylor was staring at the untouched cup of tea going cold on the studio mixing desk when Freddie Mercury walked in that November morning in 1989. The silence in Mountain Studios, Montreux, was different that day. Not the comfortable silence of 20 years of friendship, but the kind that sits heavy in your chest, making it hard to breathe. Freddie looked thinner. His cheekbones were sharper. The silk scarf wrapped around his neck wasn't a fashion statement anymore. Everyone knew. Nobody was saying it. Roger had barely slept the night before. He'd sat in his hotel room overlooking Lake Geneva, rehearsing words that all sounded wrong. "Are you dying?" Too blunt. "Is there something you want to tell us?" Too passive. "We're worried about you." What? Too soft for what needed to be said. His wife had called at midnight. "Have you talked to him yet?" she'd asked gently. "I don't know how," Roger had admitted, feeling ashamed. He was 40 years old, had performed in front of millions, had survived the pressure cooker of Queen's early years, and the cocaine-fueled chaos of their peak. But this terrified him in a way nothing else ever had. Because what if asking the question made it real? What if speaking it out loud was the thing that broke them all? For 6 months, Roger had watched his best friend disappear inside expensive clothes that no longer fit. He'd seen Freddie cancel interviews for the first time in his career, heard the exhaustion in his voice after just one take. He'd noticed how Freddie now sat down between takes when he used to pace constantly, how he'd started wearing long sleeves even in the heated studio, how his laughter didn't quite reach his eyes anymore. The tabloids were circulating rumors, vicious, gleeful speculation about Freddie's health, his sexuality, his private life torn apart for public consumption. And through it all, Freddie maintained the facade, that brilliant smile that had charmed the world, insisting everything was fine even as his body betrayed the lie. But the worst part was the lie they were all living, the performance they were giving each other every single day in that studio. They were Queen. They'd built a career on authenticity and raw power, and refusing to compromise. Now they were compromising on the most important thing: the truth between brothers. "We're recording The Show Must Go On today," Freddie announced, setting down his bag with careful precision, like a man conserving energy for bigger battles. Roger's hands tightened around his drumsticks. He'd written those lyrics with Brian May just weeks before. Every word was a prayer and a goodbye disguised as a rock anthem. John Deacon looked at the floor. Brian adjusted his guitar for the third time in 30 seconds. "Freddie," Roger heard himself say. His voice cracked on the second syllable. Everyone stopped moving. "We need to talk about what's happening." Freddie's face went completely blank, that performer's mask he'd perfected over decades of dealing with invasive press and prying questions. "We're recording, darling. That's what's happening." "No." Roger stood up, his heart hammering against his ribs. "We're pretending, and I can't do it anymore." The silence that followed was crushing. Roger could hear the Swiss mountains outside, indifferent to the devastation unfolding in that temperature-controlled room where they'd created magic for years. "Roger, don't," Brian whispered. But Roger had spent 6 months choosing silence, and he was done. "Are you sick, Fred? Really sick?" Freddie's jaw tightened. For a moment, Roger thought his friend would walk out, end the band, end everything they'd built together. Instead, Freddie did something Roger had seen only twice before in 20 years. He sat down, not on his usual stool by the microphone. On the floor, right there on the expensive studio carpet, like a man whose legs had finally given out from carrying too much weight alone. "It's AIDS," Freddie said quietly. "I have AIDS." The words hung in the air like smoke, changing the shape of everything. Roger felt his throat close. Brian's guitar made a discordant sound as it slipped against his knee. John covered his face with both hands. "How long have you known?" Roger's voice came out strangled. "April. I've known since April." 7 months. Freddie had carried that alone for 7 months while they'd all pretended not to notice, while they'd all enabled the lie because confronting it seemed impossible. Roger thought about April. They'd been in London doing pre-production work. Freddie had seemed distracted, had left early one day saying he had an appointment. That was it. That was the day Freddie's world had ended, and he'd come back the next morning with coffee and croissants, and that brilliant smile, and none of them had known. "Why didn't you tell us?" Roger dropped to his knees beside his friend. "Why the hell didn't you tell us?" Freddie looked at him with eyes that held more grief than any man should carry. "Because I didn't want pity. I didn't want you looking at me the way you're looking at me right now, like I'm already dead. We're not." "You are," Freddie's voice broke for the first time. "Everyone is. Jim looks at me like I'm glass. The doctors speak in past tense. The lawyers are preparing my estate. My mother cries every time she calls. So I came here, to this studio, to do the only thing I know how to do. I came here to make music with you, and to pretend for just a few hours a day that I'm still Freddie Mercury instead of a dying man." Roger felt tears burning tracks down his face. "You're always Freddie Mercury. That doesn't change. Everything changes." Freddie's hand was shaking when he reached up to touch the scarf at his neck. "Everything has already changed. I have Kaposi's sarcoma lesions on my neck and chest. I can barely swallow solid food. I weigh 20 pounds less than I did at Live Aid. My doctor says I'm in relatively good health for someone with AIDS, which is like saying the Titanic is in relatively good shape for a sinking ship. So yes, Roger, everything changes." The brutality of it landed like a physical blow. Roger had seen those purple marks on Freddie's skin, had convinced himself they were bruises from some costume or another. The denial had been easier than this truth. Brian made a sound somewhere between a sob and a gasp. "We should have known. We should have asked sooner." "No." Freddie shook his head firmly. "I needed the time. I needed those months to come to terms with it myself before I had to watch it break all of you. And I knew it would break you. You're breaking right now, all three of you. And it's why I didn't want to say it. But you're carrying it alone," John said quietly, his Liverpool accent thick with unshed tears. "You shouldn't have to carry this alone." "How long?" Brian's voice came from somewhere behind them. Freddie smiled, and it was the saddest thing Roger had ever seen. "The doctors say months, maybe a year if I'm lucky." "I don't feel very lucky." "What do you need?" John spoke for the first time, his Liverpool accent thick with unshed tears. "Tell us what you need, Fred." And here was where Freddie Mercury showed Roger Taylor what courage really meant. Not the courage of performance, of commanding 90,000 people at Wembley Stadium, but the courage of vulnerability, of asking for help when you'd spent a lifetime being self-sufficient. "I need to finish this album." Freddie's voice grew stronger. "I need to give you enough material that you can release music after I'm gone. I need to work. I need to feel like I'm still useful, still creating, still Freddie." He paused, wiping his own eyes with the back of his hand. "And I need you to stop treating me like I'm dying and start treating me like I'm living. However much time I have left, I want to spend it making music with my best friends, not drowning in sympathy." Roger understood then. This was Freddie's way of taking control of the uncontrollable, of defining himself on his own terms until the very end. "Okay," Roger said, his voice steady despite the tears. "Then let's make the best damn album we've ever made." "No pity?" Freddie searched his face. "No pity. Just truth. And music." Freddie held out his hand. Roger gripped it, feeling how thin his friend's fingers had become, how the bones stood out sharp beneath skin that had lost its elasticity. But the strength in that handshake was still there, the determination that had carried Queen from dive bars to stadiums. Brian and John joined them on the floor, this circle of 4 men who'd spent 2 decades together, who'd fought and created and toured and nearly destroyed themselves a dozen times over. Now they were facing something none of their fame or talent could fix. "The show must go on," Freddie said after a long moment. "Let's start with that one. I want to prove I can still hit those notes." They worked for 11 hours straight that day. Freddie's voice was weaker than it had been, his breath shorter, but the fire was still there. When he hit the final high note on the third take, sustaining it longer than should have been humanly possible, Roger heard the defiance in it. Death might be coming, but it would have to wait. After that session, something fundamental shifted in how they worked together. The next morning, Freddie arrived at the studio at 10 a.m. instead of his usual 2 p.m. "We don't have time to waste," he said simply. Roger understood. Every day was borrowed time now, and Freddie intended to make the most of every single one. They developed a new rhythm, dictated by Freddie's energy levels and health. Some days he'd record vocals for hours, his voice strong and clear, proving to himself and to them that he was still capable of greatness. Other days, he'd sit in the control room with Brian, working on arrangements and harmonies, contributing creatively even when his body wouldn't cooperate. "I want to give you everything I have left," Freddie told them one afternoon in January 1990. They were listening to a playback of "I'm Going Slightly Mad," and Freddie's dark humor about his own deteriorating mental clarity due to the disease had them all laughing through tears. "I want to leave you so much music that you'll be busy for years. I want Queen to outlive me." Roger watched his friend's face as he said it, saw the determination there mixed with fear and grief, and something that looked surprisingly like peace. Freddie had always controlled his narrative, his image, his art. This was the final performance, the last great creative burst, and he was approaching it with the same perfectionism and passion that had defined his entire career. Over the next 16 months, they recorded what would become Freddie's final gift to them and to the world. Songs poured out of him like he was racing against time, because he was. Some days he could barely stand. On those days, they brought the recording equipment to wherever he was comfortable. They set up microphones in the lounge, in the kitchen, wherever Freddie needed to be. Other days, fueled by medication and sheer will, Freddie sang with a power that defied every medical prognosis. "I don't want to die with music still in me," he told Roger one afternoon in May 1991, when it was clear he was entering his final months. "Promise me you'll release everything. Promise me Made in Heaven will see the light." Roger promised. What else could he do? But here's the part that nobody talks about. The part that transformed everything. That moment on the studio floor when Roger asked the question everyone was too afraid to voice, when Freddie finally spoke his truth out loud, it didn't break the band. It saved them. Because from that day forward they stopped performing for each other. They stopped pretending. When Freddie was in pain, he said so. When he needed rest, he took it. When he wanted to work 16-hour days to pack in as much music as possible, they worked beside him. The honesty was brutal and beautiful, and completely necessary. In August 1991, they recorded Freddie's final vocal performance, "Mother Love." He was too weak to finish the last verse. "I'll come back and do it later," he said. But they all knew he wouldn't. Brian would have to sing those final lines, and the incompleteness of that song would stand forever, as testament to a life interrupted mid-phrase. Freddie Mercury died on November 24, 1991, at 7:00 p.m., with Jim Hutton holding his hand. He was 45 years old. In the 24 months between Roger's question and Freddie's death, Queen recorded 14 songs that would be released on Made in Heaven 4 years later. Roger Taylor kept every promise. Made in Heaven went to #1 in 15 countries. The album was mixed from Freddie's final recordings with a reverence that bordered on religious. Every note mattered. Every breath captured on tape was sacred. But the real legacy wasn't the music, though the music was extraordinary. The real legacy was what happened in that studio in Montreux, when four men decided that truth was more important than comfort, that dying didn't mean you had to stop living, and that courage sometimes looks like asking the question everyone is too afraid to voice. 20 years later, Roger Taylor was interviewed about that day. The reporter asked him if he regretted forcing Freddie to confront his diagnosis. Regret? Roger's voice was sharp. Asking that question was the bravest and most important thing I ever did. Not asking would have been the real cowardice. Freddie didn't need us to protect him from reality. He needed us to walk through it with him. And once we stopped pretending, once we all spoke the truth out loud, everything changed. We got our friend back. Not the performer, not the legend. Just Freddie. And we got to say goodbye properly. Not with words, but with music. That was his gift to us. But it only happened because someone was brave enough to ask the question. He paused, looking at something the camera couldn't see, some memory that still carried weight. Besides, Freddie once told me that the worst thing you can do to someone who's dying is act like they're already gone. We gave him life right up until the end. We gave him purpose and work and friendship and laughter. We gave him normal in the middle of nightmare. That question, that moment of courage. It gave us all 16 more months of really living instead of slowly dying together in silence. The Mercury Phoenix Trust, founded in Freddie's memory in April 1992, has since raised over $60 million for AIDS research and awareness. Every year on September 5th, Freddie's birthday, Queen fans worldwide share stories and music, keeping his voice alive for new generations who never got to see him perform. In 2003, Roger commissioned a statue of Freddie Mercury in Montreux, overlooking Lake Geneva, right where that studio still stands. On the plaque, he insisted on a quote from "The Show Must Go On." "I'll face it with a grin. I'm never giving in." That's what Freddie did. That's what they all did, together. And it started with a question that took more courage to ask than Roger Taylor had ever needed on any stage in front of any crowd. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is demand the truth, even when the truth is devastating. Especially then. Because the alternative is watching someone you love disappear behind walls of silence and pretense, and that's not love. That's cowardice dressed up as protection. Roger Taylor learned that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's looking at someone you love and saying, "Tell me the truth," even when you know the truth will destroy you. It's creating space for someone to be vulnerable when the world demands they be strong. It's making music with your dying friend because making music means he's still alive, still creating, still here. The show must go on, but only if we're honest about what the show really is. Not a performance, not a facade, but the messy, beautiful, heartbreaking business of showing up for each other when showing up is the hardest thing in the world. That's what Roger did. That's what they all did. And the music they made in those final months, born from that moment of terrible courage and devastating honesty, stands as testament to what's possible when we love each other enough to demand the truth, bear the truth, and keep creating in the face of it. If this incredible story of Roger Taylor's courage and the power of honest friendship in the face of unimaginable loss moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that thumbs up button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear about the importance of truth and presence in our darkest moments. Have you ever had to ask a question you were terrified to voice? Have you witnessed the power of honesty to transform devastating circumstances into sacred time? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to ring that notification bell for more amazing true stories about the heart behind music's greatest legends, the moments of vulnerability that define them, and the courage it takes to really show up for the people we love.